Rarity sat in her new office. The air still smelled faintly of paint as she brushed a hoof across her spotless desk, and sounds of hammers floated in from her window. The ponies had been lucky in finding this new cave just a few days ago, and were quietly constructing their new homes. Rarity's thoughts were not on the progress being made around her, however, as she looked down at the report before her in disbelief. 100 times a day since coming here, she had counted her blessings. So many of her friends had escaped. So much had been saved. Who cared about a few buildings lost when lives and families remained intact? And now their new home was rising up, board by board, one day to stretch into the darkness of the cavern above them. Rarity knew all this. She was happy that they had gotten away with so much. But some ponies apparently couldn't see how lucky they were. She let the report fall limply from her grasp, her eyes tearing up. How could they be so ungrateful? She wondered in honest confusion. How can any pony kill themselves? Can't they see that life is always worth living? What? Applejack? No. Tell me you're lying. Twilight's knees suddenly felt weak, and she reached out a hoof to steady herself against the night table. No, Twi. For the first time in a long time, I'm telling the honest truth to Celestia. Applejack sat on the ground where she had fallen to her hindquarters, staring teary-eyed into space. I lied to you. I lied to every pony. There ain't no resistance. But you're the element of honesty. Why would you lie about something like that? Twilight was surprised by the desperation in her voice. One at a time, she had seen what monsters her friends had become. To hear Applejack follow suit, to know that she had always been that way. Twilight wasn't exactly angry, so much as disappointed. Was it so bad to hope that just one of her friends may have been different? I, too, am interested in hearing your reasons for this, Applejack. Twilight cast a shocked look at Rarity, who didn't seem overly upset. Surprise was written clearly on her face, but she was at least remaining logical. Twilight found herself scoffing cynically at the thought of Rarity being rational about anything, a thought that drove home how little faith she had come to place in her friends. It all started when the suicides had first begun. Applejack's face was puffy-eyed, though Twilight couldn't see any tears. I knew I just had to do something. Anything to help. Rarity kept saying that all they needed was a little bit of help, and I didn't know what else to do. Applejack turned her gaze to Rarity. I don't mean to accuse you, of course. You just kind of gave me the idea, was all. If ponies had something to believe in, some hope for the future, maybe we could go back to living the way we did when we had Celestia to protect us. Rarity nodded, and Twilight found herself speaking before she could stop herself. Applejack, no! You're supposed to be the element of honesty, but this... Celestia, what have you done? Twilight stared at the silent earth pony in disbelief, her words coming to her slowly. You lied to give them a vague sense of hope? That's it? Applejack choked back a sob and looked into Twilight's eyes, her confidence growing at Twilight's calm reaction. It wasn't a vague sense, Twi. It was the surest thing they have, and they clung to it like something fierce. When we first got here, it was the only light at the end of the tunnel, and it kept more than a few of them going. Twi, I don't mean to pat myself on the back, but my lie certainly saved lives. It saved lives. Twilight trailed off, her head drooping. Fluttershy saved lives, she reminded herself, when she became a murderer. Rarity saved lives by focusing on the short term instead of the long term. But at what cost? At what cost? Twilight repeated, this time out loud. A confused Applejack glanced at Rarity, who looked just as puzzled. "At what cost?" Twilight said again, her voice rising. "Applejack, Fluttershy, and Rarity, and even Pinkie Pie use their elements to help other ponies. But you, lying..." Twilight sputtered, unable to wrap her head around the idea. "Applejack, you may have saved a few for a while, but what have you done to yourself?" Applejack furrowed her brow, rising to her feet from where she sat. "Twilight, I ain't the important one here. If me abandoning some magical ailment didn't work any way to save even one life, then that's sure as ain't worth it." "Worth it? Worth your own morals? Worth your own self?" Twilight felt her anger rising, though she knew she was coming off as unreasonable. "Even Fluttershy is killing her friends every day for the sake of kindness. But you just abandoned everything you believed in." "Don't act as if you know me, Twilight Sparkle," interrupted Applejack, taking a step forward. "If there's one thing I know I believe, it's the lives are always more important than vague morals. The night I watched you die, the night I learned that sometimes honesty just isn't enough." She shook her head, and Twilight caught a sense of condensation. "I know my plan wasn't perfect, and I'd say it was a mite bit better than dying off one by one." "Don't you dare defend yourself like that!" shouted Twilight, her head lowering aggressively. "How can you apologize and admit your mistake, and then turn around like you regret nothing?" "I regret a lot of things, Twilight." Applejack's voice had become harder, her defenses rising against the relentless unicorn. "I regret leaving my grandma in a burning barn. I regret ever leaving Ponyville alive. I regret living under a rock for months, trapped in the dark and knowing that nothing but more darkness was outside." Tears welled up in the orange pony's eyes as she yelled at Twilight, sobs escaping every few words. "I regret living with no purpose for all these months, wondering every day if there was ever a point to all this. But there is one thing I don't regret. I don't regret ignoring my element of harmony, Twilight. I don't regret giving every pony hope, even if it is just a lie." Applejack sighed, wiping the moisture from her eyes. "I don't need you to agree with me, Twilight. I just need you to understand." "Oh, I understand, Applejack." Twilight would have rolled her eyes if she hadn't been so angry. Even the sarcasm in her voice was lost as she glared out from under her brow. "You put every pony higher than yourself, because you wanted to be selfless. Well, now every pony's lives, every day, is a lie, even if they think they are happy. Applejack, that's not helping. That's cruel." "Will you be the one to tell him, Sugar Cube?" Applejack stood up straight, looking down her nose at Twilight. "You think I made such a bad decision? Then go out there, tell every pony the truth. Crush what little hope they have and see if Trixie can even begin her attack before we tear each other to pieces." Twilight took another step forward and opened her mouth to speak. To her surprise, however, Rarity leaped between the two feuding mares. With a blink, Twilight realized that she had become very close to butting heads with Applejack, and took an extra step back. Turning slowly to look at each mare, Rarity spoke sternly. "Girls, stop this at once. No pony is going to do anything rash." She let her gaze linger on Twilight, warningly, as she finished, and Twilight felt a pang of guilt. She hadn't been ready to tell any pony the truth just to spite Applejack. Had she? Seeing that all eyes were on her, Rarity retreated to the bedside. Leaning one hoof on the table or bed unsteadily, she frowned at both ponies. "What Applejack did is over and done with. But you're both right. If we tell every pony now, we'll end up with nothing." Rarity paused for an effect, and Twilight found herself grudgingly agreeing with the unicorn. "According to you both, Trixie announced that her attack would be here soon. We quite simply do not have the time for this foolishness." Twilight paused. While Rarity had certainly proved herself inept at leadership, she did have a point. Keeping her gaze fixed firmly on Applejack's stubborn face, Twilight spoke. "You can do whatever you want," she said steadily, "but I won't have any part in this. I won't help you continue lying to this town." "We don't need your help, you self-righteous—" "Applejack, will you please shut up?" Rarity's outburst silenced the whole room, and Twilight noted with a hint of satisfaction that Applejack was left stunned mid-sentence. Turning back to Twilight, Rarity continued in a much softer tone. "Twilight, I know I haven't listened to you in the past, so you have no cause to listen to me now. But please, we need to be united in this. Will you help us?" Twilight hesitated as she looked back and forth between Applejack and Rarity. Whatever Rarity had gone through while unconscious had obviously changed her, just as Twilight knew that she had also been changed. Bags hung under Rarity's eyes, and the burden of leadership could be seen weighing down on her shoulders. By contrast, Applejack stood behind the unicorn, glaring angrily over her shoulder. Twilight struggled to keep her temper down as the Earth Pony looked down her snout, and Twilight returned the glaze. Twilight's gut churned, looking between her two friends. Applejack was only trying to help, she said to herself. What's more important, honesty or saving lives? But she didn't help. She only made things worse. And now Rarity wants to continue this lie? Twilight's face twisted up in anger, feeling betrayed by both friends. Ugh. We'll have to break into the town slowly, over a period of months. But before that, we'll have to find food. And before that, we'll have to win a war. Except they only expect the war to be won by the resistance, who will also bring them food? No, I can't. I won't. I will help this town. Twilight, answered Rarity, her words forming slowly and deliberately in her mouth. But if you will lead with lies and tricks, I will have no part in it. I'm going to find Dash, and I'm not coming back to this room. Twilight turned away from them both, one only barely glimpsing the disappointment on Rarity's face. Did our friendship mean so little, my dear? Twilight froze, her hoof in the air to push the door open. Lowering it slowly, she looked back over her shoulder. You aren't my friends. Neither of you were. The Applejack I know would never have gone this far, and the Rarity I know wouldn't allow it to continue for even a moment longer. Twilight sighed, finally leaving what hope she had behind. As far as I'm concerned, we only met the day I arrived in New Ponyville. We were never friends. Turning around dismally, Twilight left the room. She heard Applejack yell something, but all she could make out was her heartbeat booming in her head. She looked straight ahead, all the way across the office and down the stairs, and even kept the wobble out of her legs until she was in the town square. In a twisted way, Applejack was right. She knew that her lie had saved lives. But it was dangerous and irresponsible. She scolded herself as much as Applejack. And it wasn't worth the risk. It wasn't worth giving everybody hope when it would inevitably be stolen away again. It wasn't worth changing everything about herself to buy one more day of life. It wasn't until she was home that she finally stumbled and fell against a wall, eyes looking up towards the ceiling. In the darkness of her home, she was left to the silence around her, the same painful, mocking silence that resonated from her horn. First my magic, now my friends, she thought as she lay, not noticing that her eyes were tearing up. What have I got left in this place? The captain knew she was running out of time. Lack of sleep had addled her senses of direction, but she knew that they had to be getting close. if I don't escape by the time we get to New Ponyville. A moment of self-doubt threatened the captain, and she squashed it instinctively. No, I'm not giving up that easy. Come on, Dash. There's only 6 of them. They shouldn't even be a challenge. Maybe if I move quickly enough, I can squirm away. Her scan roamed frantically over the ponies near her, but they all stood on guard. If I try to make a move too early, they won't get careless again. I just have to hope that I'll have another opportunity. The captain knew that she wasn't a patient pony, and the circumstances were doing nothing to help. She could feel her hooves twitch with almost every step, her eyes looking frantically for an opportunity. She turned her head at the pony directly behind her, who glared at her. With 2 more ponies on either side, her only hope was forward. The warrant officer's a shrimp. He won't even know what hit him. Her muscles tensed, but she restrained herself. But the other royal guards will. Damn. If I don't get more than a few feet before they drag me down. Damn, 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 damn! A sudden sense of deja vu assaulted the captain. Being led captive down this path, enemy ponies surrounding her on all sides. The only thing missing from the picture was her lieutenant. She shook the wistful thoughts out of her head as the company came to a halt, the warrant officer kicking the ground lightly with his hoof. A hoof pushed the captain as she fell to her knees, her head only just breadth beneath the short pony's gaze. The warrant officer sighed and averted his eyes. Look, Captain, I don't take any pleasure in this. I just want you to know that. Could have fooled me, you bastard. The captain spit on the ground as she glared upwards. You've been at Trixie's beck and call since I first saw her. You're nothing more than a henchman who's scared of his own shadow. The warrant officer's gaze hardened, his pig-like snout scrunched up in anger. Cut the self-righteousness, Captain. You don't know what it's like to work for some pony like her. If I didn't know these guys so well, he waved a hoof at the ponies around him. You can bet that I'd have my horn broken for even talking to you. Yeah, and I suppose you are the sole voice of reason in the entire Royal Guard, right? Spare me, petty officer. Dash lifted her gaze towards the void-like sky, refusing to meet the other pony's eyes. Or is this the part where you let me go so that I can come back with an army of my own? The warrant officer chuckled at the faint trace of hope in her voice. Heh, heh. I always did like you, Captain. I'd tell you not to tell Trixie, but unfortunately, I won't be freeing you anyway. These guys don't like me enough to cover my ass for that. He backed off as the captain picked up and was thrown against a nearby stone wall, which rumbled beneath the force of her body hitting it. The mountain rose behind the captain, her racing heartbeat seeming to make the stone beneath her vibrate. We've got to make this bloody, but I can at least make sure that you're dead before we get to work on that. Sorry about this. Dash. The captain looked ahead into the steel-blue face before her. The warrant officer's horn began to glow with a yellow light, and the captain hoped that her mask would hide the fear that she could feel seizing control of her. No, I'm not going down without a fight, she cried in her mind, as her hoof tensed for a desperate kick. Do this! Huh? Said the warrant officer, as the stone next to the captain swung outward, his horn's glow fading. Wait, what? Said the captain, looking over her shoulder at her own surprised face. Wait, what? Said Rainbow Dash, her wings falling limply down to her side as the ponies behind her hesitated. The 3 ponies stood in silence for a moment, trying to figure out what was going on. The captain was the first to recover, and not about to make the same mistake twice. She scrambled to her feet to make a break for it. The royal guards had loosened their grips on her arms in the confusion, and the captain was able to wrench free, maneuvering around the ponies to make a break for the darkness. If I can get in the open for a second, she thought frantically, I can escape into the air. I can still warn Nightmare Moon about Trixie. Wait. Get her, you oafs! The warrant officer pounced on the Shadow Bolt, the two tumbling off to the side. New plan. Attack. Don't let them warn the others, cried Rainbow Dash, her wings flaring up again. She charged full-bothedly at the nearest Royal Guard, broadsiding the Colt. She was rewarded with a satisfying crunch as the Colt hit the ground, stunned as the wind was knocked out of him. The captain kicked out wildly, catching the warrant officer by luck. The unicorn tumbled away with a grunt, and the captain scrambled back to her feet, seeing her path ahead blocked by a Royal Guard and an unfamiliar Pegasus guard. She turned to the side, only to see a large red stallion glaring her down. Whoa, hey there! The captain backpedaled, not liking the look in the stallion's eyes. Can we talk about this? The unfamiliar red pony cracked his neck, his eyes glaring under the rim of a construction hat. The captain gulped. Okay, big guy, you asked for it, she said with more confidence than she felt. She charged at the large pony, leading with her hoof and putting all her weight behind the kick. Seeing the pony brace for the hit, she swerved, rolling to the side at the last second. Big is just another word for slow. She grinned to herself as the world spun around her. She righted herself as she came side to side with the earth pony, but glimpsed a red hoof fill her vision before her world exploded. Four-pony Checkers lowered his hoof, watching the Shadow Bolt tumble onto the ground near the base of the mountain from his clothesline. He looked at the limp form, taking a pondering step over to finish off the Shadow Bolt before he reached her. However, a sharp crack accompanied searing pain in his back. Ah! He cried out, arching his back as he fell. A Royal Guard stood over him, the horn glowing. The horn's glow fading. Four-pony Checkers looked up to face them through tear-rimmed eyes, but saw no mercy as the horn began to glow again. Crack! The four-pony closed his eyes for the final blow, but no pain accompanied the sound this time. Opening his eyes for a moment, he saw Big Mac lowering his hindquarters from a buck. Off to the side lay the motionless Royal Guard, her head twisted in a disturbing angle. Steadying his hooves, Checkers nodded to the Colt, wincing as another spell cracked past his head. He turned back to the fray, striking close to the side of his rescuer. Rainbow Dash lashed out at the Royal Guard in front of her, catching the mare in the jaw. She yelped out as she fell to the ground, spitting blood and scrambling away. A scream behind Dash distracted her from finishing off the mare, but all thoughts of the Royal Guard fled from her mind as she beheld the sight before her. In the blackness of the day, the only light had been the discarded torches of the three Pegasi and the flashes of magic. But now a pillar of flame shambled aimlessly through the battlefield, a scream tearing through the night from inside the inferno. As Dash recognized the shape inside the flames as her two Pegasus guards, her stomach began retching. The screams faded into a gurgle as the pony collapsed, the flames continuing to obscure the figure beneath. Her stomach churned at the sight and smell, and Dash saw a horn glowing behind the flame, and a Royal Guard smirked as his magic faded, looking down at the motionless bodies. Narrowing her eyes at the black unicorn, Dash felt something within her snap. She launched herself forward with an inarticulate scream of rage, closing the distance rapidly. Rainbow Dash savored the expression of fear on the pony's face as he looked up, realizing far too late that he was being attacked. The warrant officer scrambled through the dark, coughing as he regained his breath. A shadow against the wall a few feet away moved slightly, and he instinctively dropped to his stomach. Hearing a groan, he regained his composure and scrambled over, turning the body over. A grin crossed his face as he saw the mask of the Shadow Bolt. Maybe I can still pull this off, he thought as his horn began to glow. He certainly didn't want to consider what Trixie would do to him if he failed. A sound behind him gave him just enough time to duck as he felt a hoof swish past his head. and he raised his gaze to see a guard Pegasus land a few feet away. "Get out of here, you fool, before you hurt yourself." The warrant officer glared at the Pegasus pony, but she only lowered her head aggressively as her wings spread out. The warrant officer tensed up, stepping away from the body of the captain. "I don't have time for it. Eep!" The warrant officer barely had time to duck as the orange pony swept over him and disappeared into the darkness. Swinging around rapidly, he eyed the wall of blackness ahead of him. The occasional spark of light behind him gave deeper penetration to the heavy gloom, and it was during one such flash that he caught the outline of a face. Instantly, his horn sprang to life. The pony screamed and flew past him, a gash opening up under one wing as she did. She crashed to the ground, writhing in pain, while her wing fell, twitching, some distance away. Ignoring the screams as they mingled with the chaos around them, the warrant officer rushed back to the side of the captain. Panting from the exertion of using so much energy so quickly, he put the guard out of his mind as he collapsed into the dirt next to the twitching shadow bolt. "I guess I don't have to worry about making it look real," he thought, as his horn began to glow. "This couldn't possibly be any more." The warrant officer felt himself leave the ground, and curiously felt unable to breathe. It wasn't until he came back down again, that's some feet away, that he felt the pain of being kicked in the stomach, having the wind knocked out of him for the second time in as many minutes. Glaring up at the captain as she stood shakily to her hooves, he coughed for breath. The captain stumbled, bracing herself against the wall. She looked towards the huddled form of the warrant officer, her goggles narrowing as she spat venomously. "I'm not going down. Ugh." The captain collapsed forward, her knees buckling as she began throwing up violently. With tremendous effort, the warrant officer got back to his own four hooves and looked towards the dazed Shadowbolt. It wasn't until the light from the flame illuminated the stone wall behind the captain that the warrant officer saw the blood. Head wound. He grinned as he shambled towards her. That kick probably took up the last of her strength. He didn't need to tell himself how thankful he was for that. He gathered his remaining strength into his horn as he stepped shakily forward. His magic wasn't as tapped as his physical strength. But, with all the wasted energy on interrupting spells, it was coming close. Rainbow Dash drew back her hoof again, pummeling the face of the flame-wielding pony beneath her. She couldn't feel her hoof anymore, and she wasn't sure how much blood of the pulpy mess beneath her had belonged to the royal guard. But she didn't care. Images of the tortured Pegasus flew through her mind as she hammered again and again, not caring that the pony had long since stopped fighting back. Another scream caught her eyes, wrenching her from her rampage. Lifting her head, she couldn't find the source of it, but she did see another royal guard, unusually shorter than the others. Acting more on blind instinct than curious thought, Dash launched herself towards her next target, plowing into the unicorn. As she made contact, her shoulder caught the tip of his horn as it flashed. Searing pain shot through her arm, and she could feel the air near her face split. There was a horrendous screech as the rock above the gateway to New Ponyville was gashed open several inches deep. But Rainbow Dash gritted through the pain and landed on her hooves, barely glancing at her bloody shoulder. The warrant officer rolled several feet away, his squat body making it harder for him to stop himself. As he finally skidded to a halt near the still-burning body of the Pegasus guard, he coughed weakly. "So, this is how it ends," he thought as the enraged vision of Rainbow Dash limped towards him, the flames causing the light to flicker across her blood-stained fur. Despite, or perhaps because of his impending death, the warrant officer began to laugh to himself mentally. In a way, the captain got me after all, he reflected as he watched her savage form stagger closer. Suddenly, a red hoof filled his vision, nearly blocking his sight of Rainbow Dash. Turning weakly to his back, the warrant officer looked up at the chin of Big Mask, standing over him protectively. Rainbow Dash, he said in his plottering voice. We've been through this before. He couldn't hurt a snail after that last spell. There's no threat left. The warrant officer turned his head back to Rainbow Dash, eyes pleading for a sliver of hope. Without ever acknowledging the royal guard, Rainbow Dash hesitated and looked at Big Mac. Her eyes were hard, but after a moment she relented and slumped her shoulders. Fine, she sighed as she lifted herself into the air, nursing her oozing shoulder. Maybe we can salvage something out of this nightmare after all. As she turned away, the warrant officer turned his gaze to Big Mac. The red stallion exchanged a glance with yet another red colt some distance away, and then both turned their gaze on the retreating form of Rainbow Dash. No pony was looking at the warrant officer. Big Mac noticed a light that flickered out of time with the flames. Looking down in curiosity, more than alarm, he eyed a fiercely concentrating unicorn beneath him. Hey now, kid, you couldn't cut grass in this shape. There was a flash, and the colt blinded. The space beneath him was now dark and much emptier. Damn it! He yelled, giving a rare display of anger. Red ran over to him, and Rainbow Dash turned back around again. Sure enough, Big Mac stood over an empty patch of ground, his distraction giving the unicorn enough time to teleport away. Dash sighed. I suppose it was too much to hope for, she thought. She looked around the battlefield in dismay. The light from the torches and the burning body faded slowly. All the royal guards lay dead, but so did two of their own ponies. Most of the corpses were visibly mutilated, and Dash's stomach heaved briefly when her gaze fell on the face of the fire-casting pony. Oh, Celestia! She groaned as she averted her gaze. I did that. I actually killed him. Dash looked towards the rock wall, trying to put that sight at the back of her mind. With only the bare wall to see, she couldn't help but face her own thoughts. Why? Why can't I do anything that ever goes as planned? Why does everything have to get worse and worse until every pony breaks? Dash wanted to scream. She just wanted to fly into the air and yell into the void that mocked the day. 1,000 scattered thoughts floated through her overwhelmed mind, and she caught herself thinking of Pinkie Pie. She's the lucky one, Dash wanted to shout. She escaped into her own world. She doesn't have to live in this hopeless hellhole. Celestia, just one glimmer of hope. That's all I ask. But Celestia was gone. Who knew where? And Rainbow Dash knew it. What do you do when the only god left is the one trying to kill you? The movement of nearby shadows caught her attention, distracting her from the irony of her prayer. The world seemed to blur around her with every movement, as she inched her way towards it closer, finding herself on her hooves, even though she didn't remember landing. The memory of the first scene, when the gates had opened, replayed in her head. The royal guards waiting inside, the fear it was a trap, and then the sight of the shadow bolt. In the chaos of battle, Dash had forgotten about the other mare. She stumbled over the curled body as it lay softly breathing, coughing occasionally. Dash's vision stretched before her, sounds seeming distant and muffled. Dash pulled at the goggles on the mare's face, and although they offered some resistance, they eventually came off with a soft crackle of magic. Rainbow Dash wasn't at all surprised to recognize the glassy-eyed face of the captain, her own face, below her. It all makes sense, she thought, dazed. She didn't know what made sense exactly, and somewhere in her voice screamed that her shoulders had been losing a lot of blood. But she was happily at peace. She felt herself slipping forward as the captain's glassy eyes turned towards her weakly before rolling back into her head. The sound of quick hoofbeats behind her were the last thing Dash heard before falling softly forward into unconsciousness.